Hello again, and thanks for joining us to the Valley's People. Today in our program, we're going to meet from Belmont, a vocalist who's recorded more LPs than certainly any other singer in the Hunter Valley, and as well a man who's successfully combined a political career and that of a superintendent of a Sunday school for well over 30 years. Hope you can stay and meet our two guests today.
Hello again. Now we meet the man with the golden voice. And really that applies to only one person in these parts, and that's Jack Speering, my next guest. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Ron. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Haven't seen you for ages, Ron.
No,
Yeah.
I checked with Festival Records this week, Jack,
Yes.
and they told me that you had 35 LPs recorded, all on old-time dancing, and a new one about to come out.
Yes, to come out any time, Ron. Yes, any time at all. And, you know, it's been a great thrill for me to have all those records behind me.
Must be an Australian record, sure.
Oh, I don't know about a record, but it's been very good.
35 LPs.
Oh, yes.
Incredible.
Of course, it all came from the radio days. Old-time dancing being broadcast from Newcastle right throughout Australia. And that's where it all started from.
From the Empire Palais.
From the Newcastle Empire Palais.
Yeah.
Used to get enormous crowds every Wednesday and Friday nights.
My vision of the Empire Palais, I suppose, is shared by most people, and that is the sight of those huge wooden, what did you call them?
Used to call them punkers.
Yes, going backwards and forwards, shifting the same stale air from one end to the other. It's incredible things.
I'll never forget those, Ron. They used to go for about 11 or 12 years. They went right past my face, you know, 2 nights a week. And I used to keep in time with the music, you know. One of the old songs, I'm tying the leaves so they won't come down, so the winds won't blow them away.
Well, they did have a practical purpose.
Oh, yes, they had a good purpose for keeping the place cool and keeping me in time.
Yeah. But giant crowds at the Palais.
Oh, enormous. You had to come to see it to believe it. People wouldn't believe you. You know, the crowd, what we used to get there every Wednesday and Friday nights. And that went on for, well, the best part of 10 or 11 years. Enormous crowds there were.
How many people?
Well, the biggest crowd we ever had was 1,767 one Wednesday night. But they used to average around, or say, 1,000 to 1,200 of a Wednesday night, around 1,500, 1,600 of a Friday night.
Of course, the old-time dance is a Newcastle export, isn't it?
Oh, yes, we went several places, and we went to Tamworth Town Hall. That's our first visit away from Newcastle. First was Tamworth Town Hall, and of course it created a ride up there. Phil Furley was my old partner those days. You remember Phil?
Yeah,
everybody knows
everybody
Phil.
remembers Phil.
And we booked the Tamworth Town Hall, and we booked a shop in Tamworth. We're going to take all the bookings. And anyhow, the next day, Phil was on the air, and he received this telegram saying tickets have all been sold out. And I happened to be there when he received the telegram in the studio. And he said, I'm not going to believe this, Jack. I'll check up on it. You know, I thought someone's having him on. Anyhow, sure enough, it was true. And we received a letter from this chap that owned this shop in 2TM Tamworth, 1,200 tickets sold in 1 hour. He said, please don't have your bookings here no more. They've wrecked my shop.
And then you went to Sydney too.
And then we went to this, after that, where that was our first night away from Newcastle. And we went to Sydney Town Hall the next one. We was only on 2SM for 3 months. And Phil said, I think we'll go out to Sydney, Jack. And I said, oh, I better wait for a while, Phil. I haven't been on 2SM long enough. Let it dig in first. No, it'll be right, it'll be right. Anyhow, we went down to Sydney, and when we got to Sydney, Phil went that way, and I went this other way, and I went away to have some dinner, and come walking down Park Street toward the Sydney Town Hall, seen at 6:30 at night, and I saw all these people on the steps. Oh, it must have been between 500 and 600 people. I thought, oh, well, must be something else on beside that. Sure enough, for the old-time dance. And Tom Jacobs, he was in charge of the producer those at 2SM those days, and he said he sent away for about half a dozen more ticket sellers. And from 7:30 till 8:10, there was 2,996 tickets sold, and they shut the doors at 8:10.
Incredible, Jack.
And Denny Kenny, we used to broadcast through 2TM Tamworth as well those days. Denny Kenny had a big business in Tamworth, and he was one of our sponsors. he's outside on the, on the footpath with a dozen bottles of cold beer and he couldn't get in the place.
Yeah, in all those years, Jack, of watching you sing, I don't think I've ever seen you refer to a song sheet or lyrics. How many songs would you know?
No, I've, well, as you're reading from sheets, well, when you start reading from sheets, the time to give it away. It's a real amateur thing. Well, only just a few years back, I checked all my songs, there's 646, and I memorised all those. And of course, in those days, in the old-time dance broadcast, there were no tapes, it was just direct. If you made a mistake, it went over. But that was a part of the show.
Right, yeah.
And you know, it was wonderful to think, of course, it's a great thrill to see a huge crowd doing the Pride of Erin, all swaying together, and the Gypsy Tap, and the barn dance. It's a wonderful thrill to stand there and watch so many people doing it all in time.
Out of 640, what do you say, 7?
646.
646
might have been
songs.
Around either way, there could have been a few missing, a few over, a few less.
No top 40 in those days, really, but
No.
were there such things, did you have top 3 songs by request?
Well, the top 3 in those days, people asked so much for was I'm Tying the Leaves so they won't come down, Just Across the Bridge of Gold, and the first song that I ever sang on the old-time dance broadcast, the first one, the Old Rustic Bridge by the Mill.
Do I get a pass for 1 out of 3? I know the third one. What was the first one?
A lot of these songs was written on something that actually did happen. Now, I'm Tying the Leaves so they won't come down. It's about a little girl dying. And this...
That's the most popular song of all.
Yes, it was, and it's still being asked for too, believe me.
How does that go?
It goes this way. The verse is like, this little boy this little girl's going to die. And of course, and the doctor said, when the last autumn leaves fall, she must die. And the little boy, he climbs a tree, he said, playmates were they, girl and lad, she's home today, lad feels sad. Doctor who calls whispers low, when the last autumn leaves fall, then she must go. Lad with a tear climbs a tree, big man in tree, big man blue, sternly cried the policeman down below. He said to the boy, what are you doing? The lad replies, I'm tying the leaves so they won't come down, so the winds won't blow them away. For the best little girl in this wide, wide world is lying so ill today. Her young life must go when the last leaves fall. I'm fixing them fast so they'll stay. I'm tying the leaves so they won't come down, so Millie won't go away.
Songs with stories.
Yes, really true, lovely. And I believe, and the people used to write and ask for that song. And another old corny one, Just Across the Bridge of Gold, about a girl. People were very, very poor, and she married this rich chap, and she didn't want to marry him, but she just married him for the sake of a family, so they become rich.
Not that we want to talk about dying,
No.
but someone said to me that if I'm talking to Jack Speering, I better believe in reincarnation because he should be dead
Yeah, that's
as a
right.
result of a car accident.
That's
let's
right.
have a look at that car, Jack. And this is the car that quite miraculously you and your wife escaped from. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I was on my way to Melbourne to my daughter's place, but also to help promote one of my records. And I got 5 miles this side of Yass, and I just dropped my head for a second. I ran off the road into a tree, and part of the tree come down on top of us. And that's where we were in Yass Hospital for 8 days. And the funny part of it was, well, the next Tuesday or Wednesday, a warder came in to see me. He said, I've been down to see your car. And he said, when I saw your car, he said, I thought, well, there's a couple of bodies for me. He said, you done me out of $32. He said, I get $16 for each body for autopsy, but here you're both alive. But it was a mystery how we are still alive.
Yeah. You never thought you'd sing again?
No way. We had 8 days in Yass Hospital. They were very kind to us.
That barn dance and Pride of Erin and Gypsy Tap you spoke about, is that era all over, or do you think it's still here?
I think it's still here. Of course, the old-time dancing in Newcastle is not like it used to be. You've got to get out a bit, you know, and it's still very popular to get out of the town a bit, in the countries and that. I was just at Bathurst a time back, and the Bathurst Leagues Club there one night. We had around 550, 600. And some time after, I played for an old-time ball in the Bathurst Town Hall, and over 600 their place was booked out, all old-time. And of course, I'm at the Gosford, the Central Coast Leagues Club at Gosford. I'm there the 3rd Friday of each month, and they get lovely crowds there. I've been there for 14 years. Wonderful place, wonderful club, the biggest club in Australia.
It's a long way from the days of a singing tram driver. It's
Oh, yes.
almost a Tom Jones story.
I never thought it would happen, but again, I can thank radio for that. And used to come through the old 2HD.
You were on the old trams, weren't you, with the
Yeah,
footboard?
on the footboards, yes, in
All
Sydney.
weathers?
All weathers, raincoats on, hanging on by your teeth. And of course, and then I got to driving around trams around Rushcutters Bay, Broadway, Bondi and all those places. And of course, then I came to Newcastle. I really came from Newcastle, but I was transferred to Sydney for 6 years, and I got transferred back to Newcastle. That's the best thing ever happened to me. Of course, while I was in Sydney, I did a bit of work down there on 2UE digger session and whatnot. And
Well, you're certainly Newcastle and Hunter Valley, if not Australia's probably top recording star, Jack.
Oh, yes.
Man with the golden voice, Jack Speering. Thank you very much for coming here with us.
Thank
And my
you.
next guest is both a politician and a Sunday school superintendent, and we'll meet him in a moment. And welcome back. Now we meet a Valley man who made it compulsory for us to buckle up, and he introduced the breathalyzer and also holds a state record for the number of years as Minister for Transport. My guest, Mr. Milton Morris. Good to have you.
And it's good to be here with you.
Now, in those days when in fact you were trying to get that legislation through for compulsory seatbelt wearing, I guess there must have been quite a few compromises because it was a contentious issue, wasn't it?
It was, and of course, no country in the world had such legislation on its books. I had asked Dr. Henderson to head up a traffic accident research unit in Sydney. We had no research available to us on why accidents happen. I would say off the cuff to men like you, Ron, who were running an open line, and you'd ring me up and say, why was the road toll up at the weekend? And I'd say, well, the weather was wet. That must have been the reason. And then you'd ring me the next weekend and say, why was the road tolled down? It was just as wet last weekend. And I'd say, well, there must have been a petrol shortage, but we didn't know.
Right.
And we set up this unit under Dr. Henderson, a medical doctor, a racing car driver, and one who had great respect. And we financed him by selling black and white number plates. People are vain, we're all a bit vain, and we like to buy number plates, some of us do, with our initials on. Black and white I always thought were a much better colour than the dreadful yellow and black. And so we were taking about $300,000 a year from the sale of black and white number plates. And this gave us our research. And every bit of research that was given to us indicated that if people wore seat belts in motor cars, and it was voluntary at that stage, we had campaigns on the Harbour Bridge, signs everywhere, if every motorist wore a seat belt and every passenger wore a seat belt, that there would be a dramatic reduction in the toll of the road and in the number of serious accidents. Now, I wrestled with this for a year. When I finally went to Cabinet, it was knocked back. And for the most incredible reason. You know, one minister said, if I'm taking my wife to the Opera House and she has to put a seatbelt on, she said her dress will be crushed.
Oh, really?
And I'd say it's better than having a blood-soaked dress.
Yeah.
But after about a year of lobbying and pushing, we brought in seatbelt legislation. And with Victoria, I had told the Victorian minister what we were doing, and we were both going to announce it, say, next weekend. Well, he jumped the gun by 2 or 3 days and became the first state or country in the world to introduce this. But what happened was that in the first year, there were 300 less fatalities on our roads and a legion less serious accidents. And of course, after 12 months, I couldn't find anybody in the state who was against the compulsory wearing of seatbelts.
No, but it was a hot issue at the time,
Oh, it
wasn't it?
was a hot issue.
Yeah. I get intrigued by the people who talked about the invasion of privacy and then would drive their car and stop at a red light on top of a pole, which was only electronic.
That's right, and they were made to travel according to speed zones, to travel on the left-hand side of the road. There was no freedom in all other traffic matters, but they didn't want to be made to wear seatbelts. Now it's been accepted. The road toll is still too high, but with an increase in the motor vehicle numbers from 700,000 to 2.3 million between 1965 and 1975, my period as Minister for Transport, the road toll actually reduced. And that was due largely, almost entirely, to the wearing of seatbelts. Other matters that I brought in had an effect, but only a very marginal effect.
You had a lot of firsts in your time. I think most of the Newcastle people might remember you as the minister that cut out the refreshments on the flyer, though.
Yes, I think that was a wrong decision.
Really?
I think it was the Commissioner's decision. A minister who wants to be wise in the job doesn't enter too much into the day-to-day running of the trains or the department. I think this is something that's probably happening at the moment that is causing quite a deal of friction within the Public Transport Commission. But the Commissioner, we were losing $70,000 a year, you know, on the refreshment service on the flyer. I backed his decision because I represented a seat in this area. I think perhaps we could have modified the service, because I still find it a bit trying to sit on the flyer for so long and not be able to have some sort of refreshment.
That's the thing that intrigued the press really about you, wasn't it? The fact that you were a Minister for Transport that was just as likely to arrive by train or by bus, or by suburban commuter.
Well, I always thought it was the best way to travel. And I was one Minister for Transport who had been appointed who wanted the job. Now, most of my predecessors, irrespective of the flavour of the government, and many since, didn't want the job. It was regarded as a booby prize. If you're in the cabinet team and the Premier didn't want you, he gave you the transport portfolio. Now, Premier Askin asked me would I take the job, and he said to me, look, you've got 4 generations in the railways, you've got 10 uncles in the railways, all of your cousins work in the railways, and he knew I was mad about the railways, and I wanted the job, and I like to think that I was able to keep the government relatively out of trouble in the transport portfolio.
The story that sort of went with you for a little while, I think you correctly negated this situation, but there was a controversy about to blow up about your use of ministerial railway carriages. Was that not so?
Oh, look, there are 3 or 4 very handsome old railway carriages in the sheds at Everley workshops. They're beautiful, and they ought to be put on show, and everybody ought to be able to go and look at them. One was built in 1901 for the Earl of Hopetown, the first Governor-General of Australia. It is totally exquisite. The carving inside that carriage is so beautiful to behold, and the furniture was presented by the Furniture Trades Union to their Governor-General, Queen Victoria's representative, in 1901, hand-carved, made in their own time, and it sits in that carriage at Everley. Now, that carriage hasn't been on the rails, I don't think, since the middle 60s, because when you attach it to a train now, you have to slow the train down. So if you put it on the Brisbane Limited Express, I think the Brisbane Limited can only make about 30 miles an hour all the way to Brisbane. And that's why it's been taken out of service. There was a governor's carriage, a vice-regal coach built in 1910, which the present governor, Sir Roden Cutler, often used, a gold crown on each side of the carriage, which, and it's a handsome old carriage, not very comfortable by modern standards, but it's handy. And then there was a ministerial coach built in 1920, very old, but rather beautiful, mucked up a little bit by old Bob Heffron, who had it refurbished to make it more modern, but now you've got a blend of old and new, which makes it a bit botchy. And I used to take that carriage once or twice a year if I was going to a motor traders convention for a couple of days, and that was the office and sleeping quarters and so on. I had a ring once from the papers saying, the Daily Mirror it was in Sydney, and we were parked at Casino, on the siding at Old Casino, a little old station there that used to be on the main line, and it's been bypassed now when the Brisbane train line was built up through Kyogle. And this old station bedecked with staghorns and tropical vines, and the old station master there, that's his botanic gardens. We were parked there, and he wanted to fly up. The Mirror editor had asked someone in the service, had said the carriage was up there, and I think I was supposed to be living in a grandeur that King Farouk had never seen. And so the Mirror rang and said, could we come up and photograph you? And I said, well, why don't you save the charter airfare? Join us at Hornsby in the morning for breakfast. I'm on the second division of the Brisbane, coming down in the morning, 5:40 at Hornsby. And they joined us and they took pictures. But the young reporter and the young photographer, they spilt the tea in their lap. They didn't know how to drink tea on a train, and that went all over his suit. And by the time we got to Strathfield, he said, well, this is a rotten way to travel. I wouldn't use this carriage. So I got a page in the Mirror that was very complimentary and a very nice article, because my view was you couldn't hide anything. In that job, you had to be available, and I would like to think, without embarrassing you, that was your experience when you were on the radio. I was always available.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not a George Washington, but I tried in that job not to tell a lie.
Yeah.
I would even say, look, I don't want to answer that because I hope you won't press it. And generally, that would be respected. But most times I'd always answer questions and was happy to do so. And I was a great believer in what Billy Hughes said, you know. Billy said, didn't mind how often his name appeared in the paper or under what conditions, so long as they spelt the name correctly. And provided I had 2 R's and 1 S in Morris, I didn't mind what I read in the papers.
You've never hidden the fact either, have you, that you're both a politician and a Christian?
No, I haven't. I think Christians don't have to carry a great Bible around under their arm, you know. There are some Christians, and again I say this in kindness, who are little men with big Bibles. I was in the train going to Parramatta the other day, and there was a pregnant lady standing at the peak hour crush, and I was standing, and she had a little kiddie on her hand. She was heavily pregnant, and there was a young fellow sitting at her arm in a very comfortable seat, reading his New Testament. And I thought, now he'd be better to throw that New Testament out of the train and stand up and say, Madam, may I offer you my seat?
Mm. Yes, indeed. Mr. Morris, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed it.
Breaking term in
Hope you enjoyed our 2 guests today. Certainly 2 marked backgrounds. And in our next program, we'll have 2 more interesting people from the Hunter Valley. Hope you can join us then.